questioned Joni's role as a spiritual leader and the example she was setting for others, particularly young Christians and their mourning families. Personal decisions in the ministry quickly become public. Furthermore, every action conveys a message when you represent a worldwide Christian network. Although Joni's decision was extremely personal and emotional, it had become public knowledge. Not only were they startled, they were perplexed and perhaps even distressed. On the topics of loss, healing, and honoring a legacy, some thought it sent the incorrect message. The suddenness of it all caught some people unaware. From hushed worry to outspoken discussion, the scenario swiftly shifted. Christian news sites, online communities, and social media started talking about the marriage because it made people think, rather than because it was gossip. In what ways can Christians, how do leaders deal with interpersonal dynamics following the loss of a spouse? What constitutes an appropriate waiting period? Finding a middle ground between private recovery and civic duty. What does that entail? What began as an intimate part of Johnny Lamb's life quickly became a flashpoint for debate among evangelicals worldwide. Although it is universally acknowledged that no one can truly comprehend the depths of another person's sorrow, one reality could no longer be disregarded. Publicly visible decisions, particularly those made by religious or spiritual leaders, have consequences much beyond the immediate context in which they occur. Concerning remarriage, factors such as leadership, timeliness, influence, and trust were crucial, and as the tempest intensified, one thing became abundantly evident. The discussion was in its infancy. Because of all the drama surrounding Johnny Lamb's, as the remarrying story played out in the spotlight, many people thought the criticism would remain mostly external. A lot of people were worried about the audience, and there may have been some private conversations behind closed doors. It became apparent, though, that strangers weren't causing the most devastating ripple effects as time went on. These events were taking place within her own family. There has always been more to Daystar than meets the eye. Everyone in the Lamb family considers it their calling. As a team, Marcus and Joni laid each brick. Their offspring matured over many years, working their way up the ladder to stardom on set. Viewers rejoiced in their children's achievements, laughed at their antics as a family, and watched as they grew. Their son Jonathan Lamb rose to prominence among them all and was an influential minister. Many saw him as the inevitable successor, the individual who, in Marcus's absence, would ensure the continuation of his work. Because of this, many were taken aback by what transpired next. A worried pastor friend's letter to Joany verified what many had suspected, that tensions between the two were rising after the relationship. It seemed like something considerably more intricate and unpleasant was unfolding from what had formerly appeared like a seamless and loyal passing of the torch. The letter reveals that the central dispute revolved about Jonathan's future involvement, or lack thereof, within Daystar. Many thought that Jonathan would be ready to step up as the ministry's head once Marcus passed away. With his background, the respect of his colleagues, and the confidence of loyal viewers, he was an ideal candidate. However, when Joany and Doug Weiss's connection intensified, it had appeared that Jonathan was losing ground as the leadership dynamic began to change. Reportedly, tensions rose behind the scenes as Joany pushed Doug harder, both in public and within the ministry. Doug was unfamiliar with the Daystar people despite his renown as a Christian speaker and counselor. A small number of employees and relatives felt as though he was being loftily promoted without merit. Then came the turning point that caused a lot of people to lose faith. Tom, Jonathan's mother and another close colleague, allegedly pushed him to openly endorse her remarriage and the subsequent leadership changes. Reports indicate that he was asked to speak on behalf of the family and ministry, thus endorsing decisions with which he was not quite satisfied, according to insiders. This made things much more difficult for someone who was already grieving the death of his father. His mother was someone he liked and respected. On the flip side, he supposedly felt ignored, marginalized, and even expelled from the ministry he had devotedly served for so long. Despite everyone's best intentions, the Lamb family's season of healing and reunion ended up being marked by emotional estrangement, uncomfortable public appearances, and unusual connections. In the background, even staff members started to notice the change. Daystar employees, many of whom had long-standing relationships with the Lamb family, were now muttering under their breath about the increasing tensions. According to some, things had changed at work. In the background, people were asking, "Where's Jonathan? Why isn't he more visible anymore?" It's not just about roles, it's about legacy, and whether the ministry's future will be rooted in the foundation Marcus had built, or if it is being redirected by personal factors. Relationships, emotional decisions, and the potential for leadership to be passed down through generations create a hazy boundary between spiritual calling and familial loyalty. This haziness raises the question of whether leadership should be passed down like a family business, or whether it should always be based on calling, character, and the time of God. This topic struck close to home for Daystar. Jonathan had lived his life in preparation to assist in carrying the vision forward. However, now that Doug Weiss had taken center stage, Joanie seemed to have other intentions. Those plans appeared to have come at the expense of Joanie's connection with her own son. The writer of the letter, a close friend and fellow widow, was rather blunt about this. She termed the situation heartbreaking and worried that Joanie had put her son in a vulnerable position, her own needs above those of her family, particularly their spiritual and emotional needs. She cautioned that this course of action might lead to the severing of family relations and long-term damage to the ministry's credibility. Questions arose regarding the future structure of Daystar's leadership as Doug was introduced as a spiritual voice inside the network. Many of Doug's fans wondered if he was now in command or if he was co-leading with Joanie. What would Daystar and similar ministries depend on trust as much as on financial support? Trust that leadership is in line with God's will, and what would happen to Jonathan after years of faithful service? The public's lack of clarification only served to heighten these concerns, decided upon by the will of God rather than by the whims of individual viewers. The dramatic change in the dynamic within the Lamb family was shocking and sad for those who had followed the show for decades. Jonathan, however, has kept mostly silent throughout. He has made few public remarks, and when he does so with measured elegance. Those in the know, however, claim that he has been profoundly impacted. Some even go so far as to say that his quiet protest in the face of an issue that has grown too painful to face publicly speaks louder than words, and as the dust settles, many are left to wonder what will happen next. Is there still hope for the Lamb family's reunion? Will Jonathan fulfill everyone's expectations, or has the door already closed? Will Doug Weiss continue to play an important part in Daystar leadership? And most importantly, crucially, will the ministry be able to endure if the profound emotional scars within the family are not healed? It is evident that when spiritual guidance and familial allegiance clash, the consequences can be severe and long-lasting. The once uniformed and visionary ministry is now confronted with the true threat it once envisioned, of internal strife. This chapter is difficult to see for those who saw Daystar expand from a local broadcast into a worldwide platform. However, it serves as a strong reminder of something basic and true: no ministry can succeed if its family is failing. In the midst of the astonishment and perplexion surrounding Joanie Lamb's unexpected remarriage, there was a component of the narrative that unsettled many Christians, even more than the chronology. Healing must commence at home, else all that is piled upon it runs the risk of collapsing. She publicly cited a personal prophecy to back her decision. Joanie had a reputation for being a strong Christian media figure for a long time, standing out for biblical principles, publicly praying, and encouraging millions of people. So when she remarried a few months after her husband died, spouse Marcus Lamb, many were prepared to give her space. Grief was experienced differently by each person. Hasty judgments were avoided. However, the atmosphere shifted when Joanie revealed that prophetic words had validated her new connection with Doug Weiss. At that point, whispers began to rise above the surface level. The issue was no longer limited to timing. It had evolved to spiritual accountability, a contentious and delicate subject that has long polarized many churches. Several prominent at one point, Joanie went on to explain how she had received heavenly confirmations, or prophetic utterances from specific people that Doug was supposed to be her husband. She brought up visions, inner peace, and trusted friends and family who had sensed the Lord's hand in it. Now, this is not uncommon in charismatic. The way this was handled raised serious concerns for many in Christian circles, where people seek or share prophetic guidance. To outside observers, it appeared as though she was attempting to justify a very human decision, one that was already dividing people through spiritual language. However, for those closest to her, including, it was not only frustrating, but dangerous, that the pastor who wrote that now famous letter to Joanie conveyed her concerns about what she referred to as self-deception. The pastor did not accuse Joanie of lying or fake, but she did warn her strongly against it. In the past, pastors who professed to be following God, but were actually just acting on their own desires, emotions, and feelings of isolation, and they would use prophecy to make it all seem spiritual. This was a very painful pattern in ministry, and it was not easy to confront. True prophecy, Joanie, should never stand alone. It must always be examined by Scripture, by prudent counsel, by timing, and by fruit. A word's intuitive validity is no guarantee that it is correct. A kind person's statement, "I feel God told me," does not constitute gospel truth. That is why it is important to carefully evaluate prophecies and test the spirits, as the Bible instructs. Accountability is crucial, particularly for public leaders. In this instance, the pastor believed that Joanie's relied upon prophetic confirmations were too congruent with her existing beliefs. The letter questioned whether Joanie had sought genuine spiritual guidance and protection, or if she had only surrounded herself with people who were ready to bless her decisions, without denying that God was involved. It did, however, emphasize the necessity for discernment. Notable pastor and speaker Jimmy Evans not only introduced Joanie to Doug, but also firmly supported their relationship and allegedly spoke negatively about Doug's previous marriage. This, along with Joanie's dependence on prophetic approval, caused many believers to take offense, turned the whole thing into a public defense of an individual's decision rather than a spiritual path, which sparked a quiet storm within charismatic circles, where discussions were taking place in leadership meetings, small groups, and churches. Pastors were being asked challenging questions by their congregations about the nature of prophecy and how to discern it from emotional claims. The truth is that prophecy is highly esteemed and significant in many communities that practice spirit-filled religion. Furthermore, it can be easily abused if left unchecked. The church has witnessed many instances of leaders making significant decisions, such as marriages, church splits, and financial maneuvers, based on words they professed to have come from God. On occasion, these utterances were truthful. In other cases, they inflicted serious damage. The issue is not prophecy per such, but rather what occurs when we use it as a blank check for our own agenda. That's when things go wrong, and that's why for many long-standing Daystar viewers, this sparked a deeper concern. If the leadership of such a big ministry is this hasty to judge, then the letter to Joanie was about more than simply her marriage. It was about her handling of discernment as a spiritual leader. What does it say about biblical leadership, wisdom, or using prophecy as a shield, say, to the millions of believers watching all across the world? If we're talking about leadership, the letter made a compassionate but strong suggestion: step back, not because you're being punished, but because you need to. It wasn't about avoiding humiliation or public shame, it was about growing spiritually. Make room for contemplation, think carefully about what happened, what was spoken in God's name, and whether it was handled in a way that honored Scripture. The kind that thinks, perhaps I surpassed God. Maybe I should take a break. The question of what genuine spiritual leadership looks like in times of intense emotion and chaos is central to all this, not passing judgment or engaging in gossip. No one disputes Joanie Lamb's good deeds, but as with all leaders, the most important thing is not how high you climb, but how you deal with challenges. Using prophecy to justify your own decisions is more than just a red flag in the ministry. Because when people hear someone say, "God told me," they listen, trust, and follow. But if that word leads people astray, spiritually, emotionally, or ethically, it's more than simply a coincidence. It needs true humility, blunder. It's a weighty duty with far-reaching implications. Prophecy must be used with reverence for the Lord, not for human convenience. It urges fellowship, not solitude. And it must continually relate to Jesus, not to ourselves. Selfish ambitions. As the story progresses, many are hoping that the controversy might turn into something redeeming. It serves as a cautionary tale for all leaders, demonstrating the need of spiritual accountability alongside spiritual authority. Without it, even the most sincere decisions can veer dangerously off course. Obviously, after all that had transpired, the engagement, the hasty remarriage, the bewildered public, the grieving family, and the letter from a worried pastor, there remained an indisputable element at the core of it all. Everything changed when the dust settled, and the discourse shifted from reactions to genuine soul-searching. It had nothing to do with a new husband, leadership responsibilities, prophecy, or anything else. It was all about humility, a word that kept popping up, humility. Not the sort that comes with flashy stages, expertly crafted press releases, or microphones, the kind that quietly prays to God, asking, "If I've messed up, please help me to make it right," and then looks in the mirror. That was the essence of the letter that Johnny Lamb had received. Although it contained harsh realities, its true purpose was not to condemn her, but to draw her closer to a higher power. The letter's author wasn't merely a fellow pastor but a reverend widow, a woman who had experienced loss firsthand, someone who understood the difficulty of carrying on after the abrupt departure of the life partner. Consequently, her writing lacked harsh criticism and instead brimmed with compassion, ache, and the subtle desire that Joanie would take a moment to truly think about her recent marriage and everything else going on around her, the discord in her family, the uncertainty in her leadership, the disillusionment of her viewers, and the profound spiritual burden of it all. The letter urged Joanie to do something daring, and not because she was being punished. Not because she was ineffective, but because leaders need breaks, not to rest but to grieve, to listen to God more clearly, to temporarily remove themselves from the clamor of public service. The recommendation was to step aside and allow others to take charge, for the tensions to subside, and for healing to begin, both for her and others around her. At the same time, the letter subtly acknowledged her son Jonathan, who had spent his whole life at Daystar, was intimately familiar with its purpose, rhythm, and audience, and had quietly served for many years, never drawing attention away from his parents, but never straying from the path. Allowing Jonathan to take the lead would not be a sign of weakness, but of love, a legacy, and a means for Joanie to proclaim, "This ministry is bigger than me." He had the heart, the experience, and now maybe the opportunity to lead. The truth is that every ministry has a turning point, a time when things reach a breaking point due to growth, loss, change, conflict, or both. If that message were lived out, it would speak louder than any sermon, show, or article could ever hope to. People weren't demanding flawlessness, but rather clarity, grace, and genuine leadership, the type that doesn't hide behind titles or force its agenda, and what follows defines not only the leaders, but also the future. This was a watershed moment for Daystar. There are many stories in the ministry world of leaders who clung too tightly to their positions, whose egos got louder than their servants, and who continually put people, especially family, above personal ambition. This type of leader listens, prays, admits wrongs when necessary, and always puts people, especially family, first. The wisdom that was meant to serve others crumbled under the weight of pride, and platforms became fortresses, but it need not be this way. The letter to Joanie was not merely about what had gone wrong, it was also about what may yet go well. This was an opportunity to start over, to safeguard the legacy that she and Marcus had created, to mend broken connections, and to show the world that servant leadership is better than control leadership. Taking a step back doesn't mean you're going away permanently, it simply means you're giving yourself space to heal and rebuild. Waiting in quiet places where genuine conviction resides, rather than through public prophecy or external voices, is when God speaks again. Many leaders fail to take this crucial pause. Instead, they keep talking, keeping going, and defending until it's too late. It's too late. Humility prompts, "Perhaps I should cut back. Perhaps I ought to pose some challenging inquiries. I should probably let other people take the lead sometimes." And for those keeping tabs at home and abroad, witnessing that type of embracing humility would bring back something that is more important than any lecture or performance.
You can put your faith in the crowd that knew Daystar from childhood, mourned Marcus's death with the Lamb family, and encouraged them on their religious path. They had no interest in finding trouble or controversy. Their expectations were for veracity, regularity, and a denomination that led by example. Plus, it's still doable, but you have to put humility first. Public perception is irrelevant here. Spiritual well-being, legacy, and the pursuit of a better future are major themes, affecting not only the Lamb family, but also the viewers who are striving to on the path to becoming a true leader. The ministry is about more than just filming and producing material. It all comes down to your people skills, your ability to deal with pain, your adaptability to changing seasons, and your willingness to yield, no matter the cost. There was no mention of provide simple solutions, but it did provide a way ahead, and a pause is where it all begins. Accordingly, events of the past are irrelevant at this time. It's the following event. Will this debate over the ministry pass quickly? Background. Is it going to be the beginning of something better, healthier, and more holy, or is it going to be a turning point where humility wins out? That scene is still in the works. However, there is still time for atonement. It's always grace has passed the mark.